patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and to this podcast. I really appreciate all of your support out there, and I'm so happy to do a third Q&A episode today. This has been in the making for about a month and a half or so, and I just want to first of all thank all of those who have submitted questions for this episode to be possible. Obviously, the Q&A is one of the more interactive episodes I try to do. I've done 2 of them so far, and I've got some really great questions already. And I like to expand this more. I like to do them every now and then to serve as a bit of a change of pace for our episodes. And I love the episode format myself, but it's always great to have more interaction and be able to ask questions that we don't often get to ask in the other episodes, whether in the solo interview ones. So I just want to express my gratitude for all those there and for all those who are listening as well. I'm sure you are all very curious to know the questions and my answers to them. Now, before we get started real quick, again, make sure you subscribe and share Friends and Fellow Citizens with your friends and family. And I just want to express how grateful I am, to those who have supported the show for all this time. This Q&A and every single episode we have done so far would not have been possible without the support of many, many people across the nation, across the world. All right, so let's get into our questions today. The first question, by the way, I have glanced through these questions. I thought about a few of them, but by and large, in terms of the answers and everything, I haven't written down anything. I've only basically compiled the questions, so this will be very interesting. We'll see how this goes. The first question comes from Dallas Cowgirl. Can't say I have had a lot of Dallas Cowgirls ask me questions. Certainly not, at least not in Washington, D.C. or in San Francisco, which is kind of where the two places I frequent a lot. But you never know. It's an interesting world out there. The question is, does Sherman plan on adding a camera to his podcast in 2021? Well, that is a great question. I'm going to split that into 2. So really the first is, do I plan on adding a camera to my podcast? And the other question is, will it happen in 2021? The first is, yes, I do plan to add a camera to my podcast. I don't know when that's going to be, but I will first explain why I want a camera on and how I would use it. I do think it's important for people to know how the world of podcasting, how the world of visuals kind of link together. And as you know, podcast is a very auditory a form of communication, clearly. And adding a visual is difficult because what's different from podcasts and YouTube videos, as an example, or just videos in general, is that the average attention span, so to speak, the amount of time that people listen to a video or a podcast varies a lot. We're talking about probably, I believe the average time for a YouTube video is about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes, let's just say. For podcast, more often than not, it's really the entire episode. And so the episode ranges from 20 minutes to about 45, even 50 minutes up to an hour. So I do want to add a camera because it adds a little bit of interaction, allows the audience to see me, to see what my setup is like. It's also great to have guests on as well, to see them, because a lot of communication is visual. So I do want to add that element to it. And in addition to obviously the audio format. One thing about adding a camera, though, is I only want to use it for special events. The reason why is because it it just makes it more valuable. It seems like with a podcast, it is supposed to be a audio platform. And when you add a video to it, it has to add some kind of value to it. And it's one of those things where the rarer it is, the more valuable that camera time is, and that ability to connect with someone. So I want to do it for like a live stream or some kind of other special episode I can think of, hopefully something more interactive so we can have not just myself, but hopefully have other people too, maybe one or two other people. That'd be really great to have a bit of maybe like a round table discussion of some kind. That'd be really, really something. So I will be adding a camera. I don't know if it's going to happen in 2021. I'll hopefully get something going by the end of this year. But of course, I will keep you all posted about that. All right, next question comes from from Sally. And she says, "Dear host, will we have an online gathering since we're apart from each other all over the world?" That's a great question. I would love to do something like that. Do some like a live stream Q&A sort of episode. It'd be great to do it live. We'd find an ideal time, but we'll see how that goes when it comes to the setup and trying to figure out what platform to use. I'm thinking of Twitch. I think that could be a really good platform to do. So we can also do on YouTube as well. But I'm still working on that. Still working on something more interactive. And I think one of the goals here is to make it more interactive, get more people involved, because the podcast is not possible without every one of you. I am the host, I am the creator, but I see I have my role, but I also believe that everyone else also plays a role too. This is part of the collaboration aspect. This is why when we have guests on, it really is a wonderful opportunity to connect with different people. And so I want to combine all these elements to an online gathering that we can have together. That's definitely something I want to work on. So thank you so much for that question. Next question comes from Kayla, and she asks, "How did you find a love for history / what made you decide to create a podcast?" So let's answer the first part. So how do I find a love for history? I would go to the word itself, history and his story. History is about stories. I love listening to stories. I love hearing the plot and the characters and how people interact. This is what history is all about. It's about sharing stories and sharing those experiences. And this is why I really don't like when people only teach historical facts, but they don't teach his story. And I just love how history is made by people, and not just by leaders, not just by victors. I like to hear stories from all different angles. And this is why I love it. I love particularly U.S. history. I am a bit biased myself, coming from the United States, but just being able to listen to people, this is what it's all about. It's about listening to others, listening to their side of the story, not just the facts. That's what I love about it. So I would say that. And the next is, what made you decide to create a podcast? I really felt that there was a huge disconnect between the founders and the principles that they laid out and contemporary times. Too often people think of history as something just created in the past and only made for the past. But there's so much more to it. And I really felt that if we're going to proceed together as a nation, if we're going to embody the values that we espouse, we need to look back at our history. That doesn't mean that everything that we're going to read is going to be pleasant, because what part of life is completely pleasant? There's going to be good things and bad things. We need to embody those. And this is the purpose of the podcast, is to combine those elements of history and those principles, combine them together and figure out how we can learn from them, how we can learn from these ideas, and to be able to create new ones. And we believe that Washington outlined those principles. Now, they're not an exhaustive list, But that farewell address means so much. It means so much to how we can live as individuals, as a collective, and as a country. So I just wanted to put my voice out there and not feel like, oh, what you watch on TV, I guess it's only for those who have a fancy camera, a fancy studio. Nowadays, with podcasting, everyone on the go, this is a really great medium, and I have enjoyed it so much. I would want to keep doing this for as long as I can. It's just such a great platform, and it's only growing. I really do think that the world of podcasting is growing, and this will be kind of the new blogging almost. If you remember back in the 2000s when blogging was a huge thing. I cannot think of a better project that I've done by myself. I've done a number of things, so much more to do, obviously, in life, but this is one of the great entrepreneurial things that I will always remember. Now the next question comes from Trent, and he asks, how should the U.S. solve its long-term debt problem? Can it be fixed? This is a 3-part answer for me. For the first question, how should the U.S. solve its long-term debt problem? The first is that we simply don't have enough of incentive for members on both sides of the aisle to come together for a solid agreement on spending. One of the things that I heard about somewhere, I think it was back in 2019, it was an idea for members to literally be, I guess you could say, locked in their chambers until they could agree to a spending bill that would amount to a balanced budget. I thought that was very interesting. Now, I don't know how feasible that would be, but it certainly is a good idea, good principle. The problem is we're getting to a point where it seems like in recent years, every time we hit the end of the fiscal year, we get into a situation where people are already talking about continuing resolutions. People are already saying that, oh, we will never cross this line, ever. And it's just, there's not enough conversation. I do think that the debt problem is more of a lack of discourse and fiscal responsibility. Those principles that we often outline in our podcast is fiscal responsibility being one of the principles of Washington's farewell address. We don't have enough incentive. We allow members on both sides of the aisle to go after one another. Now, I do want to point out one thing, though, is that there are certain parts of the spending process that is very bipartisan, but that's really more on the appropriations side. Appropriations being all the numbers that kind of total for every single agency when they fund the government and when they pass one of the spending bills, and that a lot of those is about lobbying, about the members who are on the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee trying to get money into their districts. That is not the bipartisanship that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bipartisanship where Republicans and Democrats agree that no matter who's in office, no matter whether we elect Democrat Republican majorities in both chambers or a Democrat Republican president, we have to have some kind of incentive for a balanced budget. And that's why I am more in support of the balanced budget. I understand that Republicans and Democrats have different spending priorities. That doesn't mean that you inflict the national debt on more generations just because you don't live in a future generation. And I do think it's wholly irresponsible for both parties to engage in this idea that spending more for their districts is more important than the national debt and more important than national interest when it comes to fiscal responsibility. I think that's a real big mistake. So having incentive for members to congregate, to be able to discuss these issues at length, but also I would say that you need to have a balanced budget, a process, a mechanism in place where there could be a way for members to find out in advance of how, based on the previous spending bill, and how they can maneuver with the numbers a little bit to be able to achieve a balanced budget. This is going to be something very, very difficult to do, obviously. But I do think for these two things to happen, to have an incentive for members to congregate and to discuss this at length, and have some kind of balanced budget mechanism and incentive, it's going to require not just public opinion and lobbying and so forth. I think the members need to take this into heart and realize that if they care about particular issues of their own or about future generations, they might have to think about the national debt a little bit. It's not all just a big number. That's all we think about. The 27 trillion or whatever the number is now. But it does represent an inability to control your spending and realize that we don't live in an infinite world of resources. We live in a finite world. The third thing, though, I would say is regards to taxation. Now, we can debate about the tax rates and everything. I am much more in favor of a consumption-based tax system rather than an income-based tax system. I believe the income-based tax system is actually making income inequality worse. And certainly on the sentimental side, it doesn't really match up with a lot of people. Even though, in terms of the facts, rich people are taxed at a higher rate, it's not going to change the perception, though. And I also don't think that it's really reflective of our economy. If we are going to be a consumption-based economy, if we're going to manufacture things, I believe we should move towards a consumption-based tax system. We're not only going to raise a lot of money, but we're also saying, look, if you have the means to purchase something very expensive, there should be a higher tax on it, in the sense that you could afford it. So there is a bit of a consideration of an income sort of thing, but also it might also incentivize people to be a bit more fiscally responsible. Someone who tries to purchase, let's just say someone who doesn't have the money to purchase, let's say, like a luxury vehicle or a luxury house, when they realize that they're going to have to pay a higher consumption tax on that, maybe they'll be able to think twice a little bit about using a credit card. It sounds like it is a very individual base. I don't work for a bank. I'm not giving anyone financial advice here. I'm just saying that if we're going to have a system where it is based on some kind of meritocracy, based on some kind of idea that people need to be aware of what they're spending and realize that revenue should not just come from high income places. It should be somewhat of a system where people, because we live in a social contract society, I believe everyone should be paying at least some amount. But if people make whatever income it is, right, whether it's a lower income or a higher income, they shouldn't be penalized for that. They shouldn't be discriminated on it based on how much they make. It should be based on how much they consume. So I hope that we maybe move more towards a consumption-based tax system. I think the revenue is not only going to grow, but I also think that people are going to be more open to having robust conversations about tax rates. We can raise or lower them depending on the economic situation. It's going to maybe exacerbate some tensions a little bit more, maybe between the higher earners and the lower income earners. Definitely something to work out. I don't know what the politics would look like, but that's my 2 cents on how we can get there. Can it be fixed? Not the $28 trillion number, unfortunately, but we can probably get somewhere where we can at least say we are on a consistent path to minimizing the debt that we're incurring, or we can literally get to a point where we can have a balanced budget. All right, so now next question, this comes from Quincy, is if you were to run for president, what would your campaign slogan be? Oh, this is a hard one too. I can't think of a campaign slogan right now, but I will say I have thought of a coalition. As you know, but campaigns have like coalition. There's kind of like for example, there is the typical one where I could be like, oh, veterans for Sherman or students for Sherman, things like that. But one I like a lot is called joining the Sherman's March, named after Sherman's March to the Sea. Now, wouldn't sound very good if I were back in the 1860s, clearly. After General Sherman, the Union general who went through the South, basically with all that carnage going through the South, essentially trying to show that the North was more powerful than the South. So I like Sherman's March. It kind of gives a bit of a vibe like, oh, we're in this together. This is coalition. It's not just me. It's about the campaign. It's about all the people who come along with it. But one slogan I'm trying to work on, and this is just a preliminary one. It's not official. I'll have to speak to my campaign manager, whoever that's going to be. But I've always believed in compromise, and what I love about the word compromise is that, number one, it applies to Roger Sherman, who was formed the Great Compromise of 1787, which essentially combined elements of the Constitution or elements of the debate at the Constitutional Convention regarding representation. That's how we get the House representatives with the number based on population per state, and the Senate, where every single state gets equal representation. That's how the Great Compromise was put together by Roger Sherman of Connecticut. He was known as a compromiser. So that's one. Number two is I love, and in the word compromise is the word promise. So I would form a campaign slogan something along the lines of, with the compromiser, there's promise, or with compromise comes American promise. Something along the lines of that. I want to maybe play a little bit along with that, or work something out. But something that could bring a bit more positivity to the campaign, and something that doesn't seem either very unoriginal, like let's improve America, or this is an American way. Like, that's great and everything. I'll include that in my speeches, but probably not in a campaign. So not a campaign slogan. There's something that is unique, something that's catchy. That's what I want to focus on. So, working on the campaign slogan. Maybe I'll have an official one. Now, maybe I'll announce it on this podcast. That'd be pretty great. Next question comes from McKenna, and it says, fondest memory at Texas A&M. My fondest memory is watching the casket of President George H.W. Bush and taking off the Union Pacific 4141 when it came into College Station. As some of you might know, President Bush unfortunately passed away in November 2018, and I had the absolute privilege to be able to attend his funeral arrival to College Station, which is where his presidential library and museum are. It was just a really very somber ceremony that you could reflect on the life of President Bush. The Aggie War Hymn was played, which is obviously a choice that he decided to make in his will, in his funeral plans. And just being able to stand there to pay respects for the former president of the United States, to see the Bush family alongside there as well. It was a really, really wonderful opportunity. I think it says not only a lot about President Bush, but it also says a lot about A&M. A&M, to me, is a school of traditions, and to be prized institutions, too. That's what President Bush represented. So that's my fondest memory at Texas A&M. Next question comes from Harrison. Now, this is I thought it was a very, very particular question, but I love it. I really, really enjoy this one here. It says, yes, it is known that the CIA has once kept high-ranking Nazi officers in a quote-unquote safe haven. unquote, in order to use them as potential assets during the Cold War while being well aware of the war crimes they have committed. How do you feel about the directive of employing individuals who have committed atrocities against U.S. allies to serve the U.S. against potential future enemies? Harrison asks a really great question. And this is something that I don't think has a clear right answer. But here's my view on this. Number one is I would never give a free pass to those who have committed war crimes. So if we were to keep these, let's just say we're in the Second World War, we were to keep these high-ranking Nazi officers, they're not going to be freed as free people or granted asylum. They're not going to be given any kind of compensation. I'm not going to support any of that. That just completely goes against my values. But here's what I would do. If I were to conduct interviews in charge, and I was in charge of obtaining information from these people, while it's difficult to deal with basically the worst people in humanity, if you're confident that this is going to save more lives, that this is going to mean something so much more in the sense that it's going to represent the United States' large fight, not against just Nazi Germany, but it's going to represent a fight against evil, against the evils of communism and of fascism. I believe that it is justifiable to use these people to get information, get that critical information, to be able to use it against future enemies. And for those Nazi officers, you can't guarantee them anything. And as I said, I would never, ever give them anything free or make them free people at all. But what I would say is I would present to the judge or whoever's in charge of trying these people, I would say to the judge, I said, this is what these individuals have given us. You make the call on what you want, what is best for our judicial system, what's best for the circumstances. But I will be completely honest. I would tell these Nazi officers saying, look, I'm not going to guarantee you anything. Okay? But I will tell the judge in probably in a closed setting that this is what you've given us. This is how we are going to use this information. And I want the judge to consider that. Or I want whoever's in charge of dealing with these people, I want them to consider that as part of a deal. Usually what that might occur is that they might get extradited back to Germany, or in the future they might be put in some kind of facility that's not it's not like a maximum security in a prison or something. There's all kinds of ways you can deal with that. It can be some kind of lighter sentence. But I'm not going to be the judge of that because I'm not a judge myself. But I would use these people because you have to get what you can. Sometimes oftentimes in life, you can't get everything you want in the nicest way possible. And if you have to make these really difficult calls to use these people, and you know that this information is going to save more lives, it's going to help us fight against evil, I'm all for it. But very, very interesting question. Very specific one. And I really appreciate that. And intelligence ethics is something that I'm thinking about a lot when I read about the news. But hopefully we can get an episode about that, about intelligence ethics, and getting people involved in just thinking about this, because the intelligence community does serve the American people, and we need to have more cooperation on that and more discussion on it. Next question comes from Adriana, and she asks, which is your favorite football and baseball team? Why? Favorite football team? Aggie football. I'm not even going to name an NFL team because I'm not as huge on the NFL myself. I like college football better, so I'm going to go with the Aggie football team. Texas A&M Aggies, fighting Texas Aggies, I should say. Baseball team, this will be professional baseball. Favorite team has got to be the San Francisco Giants. I grew up going to games down at what used to be AT&T Park. And I love how, especially during the dynasty, during from 2010 to 2014, those 5 seasons, the Giants won the World Series of 2010, 2012, 2014. That to me means so much, because not just because we won the World Series, but it was interesting to learn about how the management got to pick these players, because it's not just a numbers game. They really had to feel like, okay, what is best to have these for these players to interact with each other and to really operate as a team. Because in the end of the day, it's not just the stats. Stats are incredibly important, but it's also about how they work together as a union. What are some ways that this team here can put together a really winning team that will defy expectations? That's what happened. And so the Giants, to me, home team, grew up in the San Francisco area, and I just really, really enjoy Giants. Although I will say, a bit of a kind of a add-on to this, I do like the Yankees a lot too, and that sounds really strange because Yankees and Giants would be rivals, but they're not like Dodgers Giants rivals though, or Yankees Red Sox rivals. But the Yankees are a team of tradition. They still require everybody to be clean shaven, to not have long hair, which I think is really good. I think that kind of tradition, that sort of idea that everyone looks sharp on the field, is something that we definitely need nowadays. So I would go with the Giants for this question, and for Aggie football team. The final question is going to be asked by Daniel, and he will ask this question via voice message.
If you could pick one person, living or dead, to be a guest on this podcast, who would it be?
If I could pick one person, that person would be Dale Carnegie. He wrote a number of very, very incredible books. One of them says How to Win Friends and Influence People. Mr. Carnegie, I think, understands leadership. He understands people, and really just the basic elements of people. And I would love to have him on the show to ask him, for number one, how he came up with these ideas. What were the thought processes that came along when he was writing these books? And to ask him a bit about what he thinks of particular leaders, historical leaders, including Washington. He did write a biography about Lincoln. So I would ask him a bit more about that. I'll also ask him what he would think of contemporary leaders now. What has changed in the world of social media? What has changed in the world of people not really controlling the rhetoric as much as they did maybe back in the past? Not to say that everyone in the past was all soft spoken, but in this day and age, when you have all these technical aspects of life and all these complexities, I would love to ask him if leadership skills are just not being portrayed perhaps in the right way. Maybe there should be more about particular leaders that should be showcased to the public. Mr. Carnegie, I think, has changed the way I look at not just myself, but also how I deal with people. I understand why people behave in certain ways, whether I like them or not. I understand now why public speaking is a skill. Even though, just like probably many other people, I was very shy myself. That's why if it wasn't for people like Carnegie, I don't think I would have a podcast, because I would be afraid to say the things that were on my mind. I would be afraid to say things even when I was wrong, even if I wasn't necessarily one with all the facts. But he really instilled this idea of self-confidence and this idea that public speaking is not just, I think it's more than just a skill. It's a value. It's not about you, right? It's about other people. It's about speaking to others, but also doing all the active listening. It's really that critical aspect of listening and understanding how everyone is egalitarian when it comes to ideas like self-importance, ideas where people, for example, rarely ever really admit that they're wrong. That it's such a basic element, but I just would love to have Mr. Carnegie on the show and to ask him to comment on political issues. I know that he interacted with politicians from all different backgrounds, with members from both parties. And I think he could really deliver a very unifying message for all of us and share with us about what humanity is like and how things have changed. Ask him. I don't know how long in the 2021 world he would last before he's like, I don't know about this world. But I would love to ask him how he views he would view people in 2021 compared to back about 100 years ago. So if Mr. Carnegie were to be alive today, I would send him the biggest invitation card, Friends of Fellow Citizens invitation for him to be on our show. And with that, I want to thank you so much for listening to this third Q&A episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you will continue to submit those amazing questions. Regardless of whether or not there's a Q&A schedule, I really hope that you reach out to me if you have any questions about anything. I love to hear from the audience, and I want to grow that this year and in future years to come. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week, and I will see you next time on the next episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. Take care and so long.